And welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. Listen, guys, I want to make an appeal to my friends of the political right who are still talking about their precious ideology or principle of limited government. Well, I can appreciate and understand where you're coming from and how the growth of government really diminishes the power and the role of everybody in our society and how it's detrimental to a nation like ours as a whole. The problem is that simply arguing in favor of limited government isn't enough. What you have to understand is the concept of limited government, or as we Catholics call subsidiary, is something that comes from the old world. And it was something that the framers and the founders of America and the Enlightenment thinkers took for themselves, apart from the grander ideology of the old world, particularly apart from Christendom and the role of the church and the proper moral function of a grander sort of civilizational principle. Limited government in and of itself is not an answer to the problems of America, because limited government comes under a strict definition that follows a certain principle of moral order, primarily the Catholic faith. That's why the concept of limited government worked in the old world, and it worked very well as everything went down to the local order, to the smallest level of society. The irony here is that the concept of limited government has never really existed in America per se, because government has grown and grown and grown since the founding, right? This is why this thing is out of control now. Nobody has an answer to get the genie back in the bottle at this point in history. Here's the problem. Here's the problem that you guys on the right have to deal with. And you guys have to take this seriously at some point, because government is going so out of control at this point in time that you guys don't even have an answer. The idea of limited government is nothing but a platitude, a meaningless platitude. When the framers of this country, the founding fathers of this country, decided to take the principle of subsidiary, limited government, and separate it from the moral law, it rooted any ability, any true ability for government to stay small. You separated the moral law from the greater, broader principles of the governing body philosophy of our civilization. Limited government works when people are properly ordered in moral principles. Without those moral principles, guess what? Civilization, society breaks down, the family breaks down, the culture breaks down. And when those institutions break down, who is there to pick up the pieces to fallen individuals? Who? Government. And that's why government is growing. Let me tell you why government has grown. Because it's needed to grow. It's been a needed function of modern civilization to grow. As family breaks down and culture deteriorates, somebody has to be in a position of power to help individuals that have broken lives. Surprise, surprise, right? There's no way that the concept of limited government ever works without the church in place. Because guess what? A lot of those functions that, or should I say those roles of picking up the broken pieces of society that the government now does, the church used to do. The only difference was the church understood and knew that it had a duty and a role to not only help control man's fallen nature, but also to help pick up the pieces of where these things went wrong and how they went wrong. When a family breaks down, what do we have today? We have government that steps in, whether it's wealth redistribution or some kind of other programs. The problem, these are bland, sterile, secular institutions, right? They don't care about governing principles. They care power. And as individuals run to the government for aid and assistance for their broken families, their broken cultures, their broken moral principles, government and government officials are empowered by this. But if you prevent individuals from breaking down their lives, which guess what? That was the role of the church. You don't need government. And guess what? Even when things happened in the old world, the church was there to pick it up. The only difference was the church taught proper and just morality and gave us the sacraments in order to help control our passions. So we could pick ourselves up once we were broken in some capacities. See? We're human beings. We're not utilitarian creatures. This is the problem with the political right. Everything is a utilitarian principle in the end, and they never deal with real human affairs. The broken, fallen nature, they've never understood that because the Enlightenment thinkers separated the lock and the key. They separated the moral law from the greater moral principles of our governing politics. You can't do that. The church shaped civilization in a certain manner to where this idea of local subsidiary and proper moral principles can all work together. But once you separate the two, the concept of limited government doesn't work. This is why the government has grown and grown and grown and grown in our time. It's not a matter of limited government versus big government. It's actually limited government versus secular government, right? Or proper government and true and just government from secular government, because this is the problem here, right? The problem is that we have no more moral foundational principles. Somebody has to pick up the pieces. And by ousting the church, you left government as the only arbiter of truth to pick up these pieces. This is why I say, my friends, the right, it's all wrong. Limited government is not the answer. Proper government is the answer. Because guess what? You're never going to get rid of government. And if people are broken, culture is broken, somebody has to step in to fix the problems of civilization. The church used to do that while getting people off their feet and teaching them how to pick their lives up. I mean, this abstract idea of how the conservatives always argue about how, well, you know, welfare is so destructive, and once people go on welfare, they're there for a lifetime and it destroys family. Right, but who's there to pick up the pieces? Who? Who's teaching people proper and just morality so they know how to pick themselves up? See, in the old world, right, it was the church that was in charge of things like orphanages, right? So you lost your mother and father, devastated. But the church was there to be sort of, to pick up that moral sort of baton, to pass that on, so children were still properly raised, not only with proper and just morality, but also to have access to the sacraments while being taught the catechesis of the faith. So even without a mother and father, those children, even coming from families where they lost their parents, understood what right and wrong was. But we don't have moral principles of truth anymore. We ousted Holy Mother Church. We secularized the whole country. So when families break down, who is there to help out these families? Nobody. Nobody. And as I've told you so many times before, the privatization of religion has been disastrous, because the privatization of religion is not about teaching moral truths and proper and just order in our society. It's about accommodating our fallen nature. That's why I keep telling you guys, America goes wherever Protestantism is gone, right? As Protestantism breaks down and its doctrinal chaos creates chaos within Protestant circles, guess what happens to America? It's why Americans have been in church throats since the founding. Because there is no doctrinal unanimity, or really for that matter, any truth within Protestantism, America has gone down that same path. It's no wonder why one generation rebels against the previous generation in America. How is it that children perpetually rebel against their parents and nobody sees this as a problem? When in the old world, the younger generation respected and looked up to the previous generation. And that wasn't just Christian. Other civilizations have done that. Asian cultures have done that. But in America, we spit on anybody that comes previous to the most current generation, right? Why is that? Because we don't teach proper and just moral order anymore. This concept of extreme individualism at the expense of the familial system has broken down our civilization. That's why I say simply screaming and yelling limited government is not an answer. The question is, what kind of government should we have? And I would suggest that secular governments don't work. That's all we've had since the Enlightenment. Tell me one nation where it's worked. Where? You want to give me a 70-year period between the signing of the Constitution, the ratification of the Constitution, and the Civil War when the tyrant Lincoln came in? Is that the best you got? A 70-year period? Because apparently that's what I've been told, is that America worked for about 70 years. Okay, 70 years. Really? That's the best example we have? Right? We've all seen this coming down the pipe throughout our whole lifetime, this progressive slant to the left, this perpetual slant to the left without any answers. And government continued to go throughout this whole period. That's why I say when conservatives simply scream and yell, limited government, it's not the answer, guys. It's not. And you guys look like fools whenever you say that, when you don't argue for proper and just morality, and when you don't argue for putting back in place the principles of Christendom, those governing body of principles that built up our civilization, that gave us all the legal systems that we have, the proper and just legal system, the scientific institutions, the universities, all that help formulate and form the greatest civilization in the history of the world up until the Enlightenment. Those are strong and vibrant cultures, strong institutions, properly ordered, strong families, familial systems. It's like going into a restaurant, right? It's like going into a restaurant and you say, I want the Cuban sandwich, right? But I don't like mustard, I don't like mayonnaise, I don't like pickles. Guess what? It's not a Cuban sandwich anymore if you take all those elements out. You've created another animal that probably doesn't taste as good. This is what we've done in the West with this limited government talk. Limited government was an idea of the old world under certain precepts and conditions, and the way society was structured under certain conditions. Primarily that the family had to work, the family had to stay together. The family was the bedrock of limited government, and yet in the West, through the concept of liberty and license, we've given every incentive for families to be destroyed. Divorce and remarriage, pornography, license of every kind. Go down the list, shacking up out of wedlock, all in the name of license, all things that destroy the family in the end. That's what they do. And without the family in place, without a strong family in place, the concept of limited government doesn't work. And why has the family been destroyed? Because we've removed the elements that keep us close to God, the church and the sacraments. Without the church and the sacraments, there is no peace in the home. There is no stability in the family. And without stability in the family, the culture rots. And with the culture rotting, as I said so many times before, it's only a matter of time that that culture produces some of the most despicable villains on the face of the planet that govern all of our lives in government. And yes, they're going to continue to grow government to, again, substantiate their own power. Again, it's not about limited government. It's about proper and just order, proper and just morality. Understanding, recognize the one true triune God, his mission, his one true covenant, and abiding by that covenant. That's what the old world was based upon. That's where the concept of subsidiary, limited government came from originally, and it all worked well until the Enlightenment thinkers decided, I'm gonna break up the Cuban sandwich because I don't like mustard, I don't like mayonnaise, and I don't like pickles. It's not a Cuban sandwich anymore. It's a pile of crap. And guess what we have in modernity today? A pile of crap. Nobody knows the rules anymore. Nobody knows the governing body of laws anymore. And platitudes of limited government don't make any sense anymore because they don't have a foundation of origin anymore. This is more than just legal argumentation here or constitutional principles. This is a broader understanding of civilization, the familial system, the moral system of governance, and ultimately the theology that we choose, the theology of truth, the theology and the analogy of the faith that goes back for 2,000 years, the way God laid it out, and not the way we lined it up in order to justify our fallen nature and our sins. And that's why we have this godless liberty. And we've all indulged in license. The family is destroyed. And now you say limited government is the answer? Big government is the future. And there's not a darn thing you guys can do to stop it at this point because you guys have abandoned moral order. You've abandoned Holy Mother Church and you've abandoned Christ our King. Stop it with the limited government stuff. There's other things that precede the principle of limited government that have to be reestablished and understood before we move on to these secularist arguments that make no sense and only continue to drive Western civilization off a cliff. And nobody has an answer at this point anymore. This is Frank, signing off for Frankly Speaking. Good night, everybody.